If you've ever gone to install a program on Windows, you may have noticed that there are one of two possible file types for installing the program. It could be an exe file, an executable, or a .msi file. So for one example, if you go to download Firefox, the browser, you do actually have the option to download it either as an exe or an MSI file. And you may have wondered, what is really the difference? Is it better to use one or the other, and why? So in this video, I am going to explain what the differences are, what this MSI file is, and why you might want to use one over the other if you do have the choice. So an exe file, it's executable, which basically just means it does something. It's not like a file type that just stores data, like a docx file for Word or a text file or something like that, where another program reads it. The exe is the program itself. Now, it can do several things. It can be just a general purpose program that runs or something, or it could be a mini program that runs and its only purpose is to install another main program. And in that case, it would be the installer. But there is the other file type, .msi. MSI is short for Microsoft Installer, and unlike an exe file, which could be like a general purpose, it can be either an installer or the program itself, an MSI file will always be an installer file. It's a specific format created by Microsoft to standardize installation files. And one of the main differences with an MSI file is it doesn't actually execute any code itself. So the exe file, you run it, and it itself does everything to install the program. It puts all the files in the correct place, whatever. Whereas an MSI file is more a container. It's a wrapper, a set of instructions, and then something else takes all that data and does the actual installing. And that is the Windows API. So put in simpler terms, when you run an MSI file to install something, you basically are telling Windows itself, not the file, but Windows, hey, I have a program here that needs to be installed. Can you install this program for me? And then Windows will use its API, and it has a dedicated centralized program to deal with these installer files called MSI exec. So then you're actually running this MSI exec exe, which is an executable, to come and handle this container, and it contains instructions for where to put the files, what changes need to be made to the registry, that sort of thing. So the outcome of the installation is going to be the same, whether it's an exe file or an MSI file. So you might be wondering, well, then why use one over the other? Now, whether it makes a difference if you use an MSI or the exe installer is really going to depend on your use case. If you're just a home user installing a program for yourself on your own computer, it really doesn't make a big difference, although I would recommend probably using the MSI if you have the option, although again, it doesn't really matter, and I'll explain why that is next. However, there are advantages for certain cases, like if you're an enterprise or you're an IT administrator and need to install a program on a whole fleet of computers all at once, then there are major advantages to using an MSI. And one of them is that it is standardized. And that means that there are known switches or parameters that you can use on these MSI files. They're all the same. So for example, you could install all the programs automatically using quiet mode, which means it doesn't pop up a thing to confirm every step. So if you're installing a program on a user's computer remotely, then it will just do itself automatically instead of requiring the user to click through all these settings, and then you have to explain to the user which ones to click and all that nonsense. And there are a whole bunch of different switches, they're called. So for example, one could be to force a repair of the files. Another one could enable logging. If there's a problem, then it will add more log files so you can figure out what's going wrong. Whereas if you're using an exe file to install something, there are several possible installer platforms that you could use. I don't know if platform's the right term, but basically different software products that you can buy to create an installer for your particular program that is not a standardized one from Microsoft. And they might have additional features that might require extra stuff that an MSI file can't handle. But that means that if you're installing something with an exe, you don't really know what switches or parameters it could have unless you look it up. For the average person though, like you and me, there are two slight advantages, I would say from my understanding, for MSI files to use them instead, if you can. And one of them is when you run an MSI file, just automatically as part of this standard format, it will create an uninstall script automatically to basically roll back anything it did, whereas with an exe installer, it might also include an uninstaller if you go to uninstall it, but you don't know that it's actually removing all the things that it installed. So with an MSI file, you can know that you're more likely to actually remove all the stuff that did get installed, because since it's just a set of instructions for where to put what files, it's simple enough to just reverse that process. Now, of course, there is one caveat, which is that if the program creates files after it's actually installed, well, then that is up to the program to remove those files, because the MSI installer only handles what is created initially when installing it. If the program then creates settings and backups and whatever after you run it, then that might not be uninstalled either way. Another advantage is that you will probably know that an MSI file is not going to be a virus. Whereas an exe file, like I said, it can be used for lots of different purposes. It could be a legitimate installer, or it could be a virus in itself. Whereas a MSI file, you know what it is. It doesn't execute anything itself. It's just a set of instructions. So it makes a lot less sense for a virus to be distributed as an MSI file. I mean, theoretically, it could be possible that it's distributed in an MSI file that installs the virus, but then at that point, if you're getting the user to run that anyway, then you may as well just distribute an exe file. So I'm not really aware of any viruses that have ever been distributed as an MSI. There might have been them out there, but it's extremely rare where you don't have to worry about it really, or at least not nearly to the degree if it's an exe file. Now, of course, in any case, whether you're downloading an MSI or exe, you still have to take into consideration where you're getting the file from. If you're just downloading it from a torrent or something, you still don't know what it could be installing. It could be installing bloatware, adware, something like that. Even though it's not a virus itself, theoretically, again, it could be putting stuff you don't necessarily want there. So if you're downloading a program from like Firefox from the official website, you probably don't need to worry in terms of security which one you choose. But if you're getting it from some random place that, yeah, you believe this is a secure thing, but it's distributed as an exe, you might be a little bit more sketched out than if it's distributed as an MSI file. But again, it's just one thing to consider out of the rest of the common sense you're going to be using for whether you should trust a file or not. So to answer a question very straightforward, if you have the choice, should you install with MSI? And I would say yes, personally, I would, but that's not always the option. Sometimes you do have programs that are available as both. For example, I mentioned Firefox, although you do have to kind of seek it out. If you just hit download, it's going to download by default as an exe. However, if you do click download options in other languages, you do have a drop-down where you can select your preferred installer, and here you can see you can download it as an MSI or not, and you would just have to select that. So sometimes you do have to go a little bit out of your way to find other types of installers they offer. Another example is Google Chrome. If you want to get the MSI installer for that, you actually have to go to this enterprise page for Chrome. And I found this by Googling Chrome MSI installer, and then that took it to this page. From what I understand, there's not really a way to get to this directly. But here it does show you an option where you can download either as a bundle, which seems to be just the MSI plus some extra stuff, or just the MSI file. And again, they're kind of catering this towards enterprises which are going to be installing it on a whole bunch of different systems at once. Now, one example for software that uses MSI by default is Elgato software I found. So for the Stream Deck, stuff like that, I found that it seems like all their software on their download pages download as MSI by default, so that's interesting. So if you do want to get the MSI installer for whatever reason, you just prefer it, or you do have to install it on a whole bunch of systems, then what you could do is, again, search for the name of the program and then MSI installer. Maybe it'll bring up that page, or sometimes you can also search the program name and then offline installer. That might give you multiple options, because a lot of times programs, when you download the installer, it's basically just a downloader that then downloads the installer, if that makes sense. So for Google Chrome, this is what happens. You may download the installer, technically it's called, but then it's a very small file, and then that thing just actually downloads the installer. So it's kind of weird, but sometimes you can actually download the offline installer, it's called, which contains everything in itself, and then sometimes that is what the MSI file will be. So you'll know that if it's an MSI file, it's going to be an offline installer. So that might be another advantage. If you don't like using the online downloader thing, you can look for the MSI version. So not too much more to say about it. If you were ever wondering whether it makes a difference, the answer is not really, but you may slightly be biased towards using the MSI if you have the choice. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments, give it a thumbs up, and if I left anything out, feel free to let me know down there too. Also, if you're new here, maybe consider checking out the rest of my channel, seeing some of the videos I've uploaded recently, and consider subscribing. And if you do, be sure to click the bell next to the subscribe button to enable notifications so the videos don't get lost in the rest of your subscription feed. I upload about twice a week. And finally, if you guys want to keep watching, the next video I'd recommend is one where I made talking about a really cool spectrometer gadget that I have, and I tested out some blue light blocker glasses to see if they actually work. Stuff like that should be pretty cool. I'll put that link right there. So thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.